بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Is it okay for me to speak at this tone? Inshallah, I don't need to raise my voice too much. Trying not to exert my throat too much because I had to push myself a little bit to come today. My throat is feeling a little bit, you know what I'm talking about, that feeling. So yeah, khair inshallah anyways. Last week we discussed the constitution, right? We mentioned that there were a set of rules that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ laid out as part of his, establishing the foundations in Medina, and he made several treaties, right? So he made treaties between the Muslims. He had certain laws for them. He had certain laws for the Jews of Medina, and also for the pagans, and some general rules that are applicable to everybody. We also talked a little bit about how Quraysh was attempting to incite fitna in Medina by contacting people who were along the same wavelength as them, meaning the pagans. And namely, so we have several narrations that indicate that that they would reach out to Abdullah ibn Ubay. Remember, Abdullah ibn Ubay, he is the person who would later be known as the leader of the hypocrites. But at the moment, he is a pagan. He's not a Muslim, he's a pagan. So they would send to Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, who of course bears hatred and a grudge towards Prophet Muhammad ﷺ because he sees that he took what was rightfully his, So they would say basically, and the books of Seerah mention on several occasions, Abdullah ibn Ubay seems to have assembled, in fact, a group of his own that was ready to go and fight against the Muslims. But Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would always seem to resolve it with his wisdom and his hikmah, without actually, any kind of fights or any bloodshed or anything like this. So, in a narration, as mentioned one time, he said to him, "Oh Abdullah, you've allowed the threats of Quraysh to basically get to your head." And he tells him, what would be the benefit if you were to right now come and attack us? What will you benefit by by doing what they are pushing you to do? It's now you're going to be killing your own fathers, your own brothers, your own sons. What are you going to be benefiting by you attacking us? And so whenever they would hear this, they would go back to their senses and they would disassemble, and no fight would actually take place. And we mentioned that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ around, it's still early Madani phase, he preached to the Muslims a lot of adab, mannerisms, right? And we mentioned some of the authentic hadith last week, because he wanted, of course, his goal is to build a society that is founded upon the best of all akhlaq, the best of all manners, and that has the highest status, to become the best ummah out of all the nations. Literally, لِتُخْرِجَ النَّاسَ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ, as the Quran tells us, to bring the people from the depths of darkness to the light of Iman. And so we mentioned some of the hadith last week. We'll mention a little bit more this week. And the reason I'm mentioning them is just because they're very, very famous. All of us have probably heard at least a few of these before. So, for example, the hadith of Al-Mu'minuna كَرَجُلٍ واحد. All of the believers are like one body. إن اشتكى عينه اشتكى كله وإن اشتكى رأسه اشتكى كله. If a certain body part feels pain, all of the body feels pain. If the head feels pain, all of the body feels pain. In another hadith, المؤمن للمؤمن كالبنيان يشد بعضه بعضه. That mu'mins are they support each other. They're like each other's foundations. Every brick supports the other brick. In another hadith, لا تباغضوا. Don't hate one another. ولا تحاسدوا. Don't be envious of one another. ولا تدابروا. Don't plot against each other. وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا. And be brothers for the sake of Allah. ولا يحل لمسلم أن يهجر أخاه فوق 3 أيام. It is not allowed, it's not permissible for a believer to abandon his brother for more than 3 days. This is that ruling that we have, of course, to this day. المسلم أخو المسلم لا يظلمه. That the Muslim is the brother of another Muslim, he does not oppress him. ومن كان في حاجة أخيه كان الله في حاجته. Whoever helps one of his brothers, Allah Azza wa Jal shall help him. ومن فرج عن مسلم كربة فرج الله عنه كربة من كربات يوم القيامة. Whoever lifts a difficulty from from the life of his brother, Allah shall lift a difficulty for him on the day of judgment. وَمَنْ سَتَرَ مُسْلِمًا سَتَرَهُ اللَّهُ. Whoever covers up for a Muslim, Allah Azza wa Jal shall cover for him. The Prophet also says, "Irhamu man fil ard, yarhamukum man fis sama." Have mercy on those who are on earth, so that the one who is in the heavens can have mercy on you. ليس المؤمن الذي يشبع وجاره جائع إلى جانبه. There is no, the believer is not the one whose belly is full when his neighbor is sleeping, when he is starving. Uh, so, all of these, we can keep talking. إماطة الأذى عن الطريق صدقة. Whoever takes off a harmful object from the road, it is a form of صدقة. وهي شعبة من شعب الإيمان. It is a branch of faith. It's mentioned in the hadith of the branches of faith. So, all of these are a hadith about manners. He used to also encourage them not just to have general manners in terms of treating one another, but he also used to preach to them manners of, or rather, encouraging them to spend for the sake of Allah, encouraging to donate, to help out, to support one another. So, for example, he would tell them, الصدقة تطفئ الخطايا كما يطفئ الماء النار. Sadaqah erases or extinguishes sins just like water extinguishes fire. He tells them as well, اتقوا النار ولو بشق تمرة. Save yourself from the hellfire even with half a piece of a date if you can. فإن لم تجد فبكلمة طيبة. And if you are unable to, then at least a friendly word. أيما مسلم كسى مسلما ثوبا على عري كساه الله من خضر الجنة. That whoever puts clothing on the body of one of his on a Muslim brother, Allah Azza wa Jal shall grant him clothing of the garments of Jannah. وأيما مسلم أطعم مسلما على جوع أطعمه الله من ثمار الجنة. Whoever feeds a Muslim who is hungry, Allah Azza wa Jal shall feed him from the food of Jannah. وأيما مسلم سقى مسلما على ظمأ سقاه الله من الرحيق المختوم. Whoever quenches the thirst of a believer, Allah Azza wa Jal shall make him drink from الرحيق المختوم, the sealed nectar, the drink of the people of Jannah. And the hadith are a lot, of course. I'm not going to go through them one by one, but you get the gist of it. He's encouraging the Muslims he's changing, he's reforming their way of life. This way of life that I'm only living for myself, I'm only collecting for myself. I don't care about anybody else. The one who is strong oppresses the weak. The one who is weak has no rights. He's reforming all of these foundations, not just in terms of religious commands, like you have to do this, you don't have to do that, but even in terms of their way of life, in terms of encouraging the best kinds of manners. Of the things that also happened towards the early Madani phase as well is the revelation of Surah Al-Baqarah. The revelation of Surah Al-Baqarah, and also certain portions of Surah Ali Imran. Primarily the verses that speak about the Ahlul Kitab, the Jewish people. And the majority of Surah Al-Baqarah, as we're going to mention, it was revealed mostly in the first 2 years of Medina or so. Okay, the majority of it. So we know, for example, the last 2 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed in Mecca, late Mecca, after Isra al-Mi'raj, right? The majority, the bulk of it, the commandments and the ahkam and the verses about the Jewish people, they were all revealed mostly in the first couple of years of Medina. And the books of Seerah, subhanAllah, it's so beautiful. The books of Seerah, they literally have a verse by verse tafsir of the verses of the Surah Al-Baqarah. Now, so obviously, I don't have the time right now to go on a verse by verse tafsir, word by word tafsir of what is the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. Even though, inshallah, perhaps I do have plans for this in a future series. I don't know when we can get to that, but inshallah. But at least if we can skim through Surah Al-Baqarah at a very high level, we can see that Surah Al-Baqarah, it starts off by introducing what is the Quran in the first place. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. It's a source of guidance for those who have fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. And it explains to us who are the quality. It starts with the qualities of the believers, and then it mentions the qualities of the disbelievers, and then it mentions the qualities of the hypocrites. And the beauty, by the way, of reading the tafsir of Surah Al-Baqarah in the books of Seerah is that it gives you the context from the Seerah itself. It tells you, okay, this verse is describing the quality of the hypocrite, is referencing the hypocrites who were amongst the Aus and al-Khazraj, and tells them this, and that. Okay, so it's a very beautiful. So I encourage all of you, if you have that motivation in you, open one of the books of Seerah, and of course you will find English translations to all of them. Seerah of Ibn Hisham. He dives into it, into literally verse by verse. He has like half the book, half the second volume is literally just the tafsir of Surah Al-Baqarah. And so then the surah urges people to worship Allah alone without partners, and reminds them of the blessings and the bounties of Allah upon them. الذي جعل لكم الأرض فراشا والسماء بناء وأنزل من السماء ماء فأخرج به من الثمرات رزقا لكم. Right, so all of these reminding of the blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal. And then there's a whole set of verses that start with Ya Bani Israel. Right? Now it switches the speech to the Banu Israel, mainly addressing the Jewish people, because the Jews were primarily present in Medina, less the Christians, but the Christians also fall under Ahlul Kitab, but it is primarily addressing the Jewish people and the rabbis, and reminding them of their history with Musa alayhi salam. He would always say وَذْكُرُوا, right? Remember when you used to do this, وَإِذْ. So you will find a lot of وَإِذْ. Remember when you used to do this with Musa alayhi salam. Remember when you did that. Remember when the Banu Israel did this. Remember when Musa told you that. So you have a whole set of verses starting with Ya Bani Israel, reminding them of their history, reminding them of the covenant that they had taken. Al-Mithaq. وَأَوْفُوا بِعَهْدِي أُوفِ بِعَهْدِكُم. What is this ahd? What is this mithaq? The covenant that they shall follow the sharia. This is the sharia. That they will follow the commands of Allah, the laws of Allah, and in return Allah says, I shall also fulfill my promise, and I shall give you a good life, and I shall enter you into Jannah in the hereafter. And a lot of the verses were encouraging them not to show arrogance like the people of the past did. That learn from the mistakes of the nations of the past. Don't show arrogance when you clearly see the truth in front of you right now. And the Surah Al-Baqarah is so beautiful. It literally mentions, it says that when they saw Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ مَا عَرَفُوا كَفَرُوا بِهِ. They saw what they knew. And it's very interesting. It uses the word they knew, meaning they knew he was the Prophet. But they chose to reject him. And many verses along these lines, it even references the wars and the wars of Bu'ath that used to take place between the Aus and the Khazraj, and the role of the Jews in these wars. We mentioned before that the Banu Qaynuqa', they had allies with the Khazraj, and the Banu Nadir and the Banu Qurayza, the Jewish tribes, they had allies with the Aus, and they would play this role of just starting fire between the two. And they would loan them interest-based loans so that they can make money out of them, weapons and money and whatnot. So they played this dirty role, and the Quran exposes them. وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ لَا تَسْفِكُونَ دِمَاءَكُمْ وَلَا تُخْرِجُونَ أَنفُسَكُمْ مِنْ دِيَارِكُمْ. Then in the next verse, ثُمَّ أَنْتُمْ هَؤُلَاءِ تَقْتُلُونَ أَنفُسَكُمْ وَتُخْرِجُونَ أَنفُسَكُمْ مِنْ دِيَارِكُمْ تَظَاهَرُونَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِالْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Right? You're starting this fight. وَإِنْ يَأْتُوكُمْ أُسَارَى تُفَادُوهُمْ وَهُوَ مُحَرَّمٌ عَلَيْكُمْ إِخْرَاجُهُم. That when you capture prisoners, you ransom them out, even though you know it was haram. It was made haram to you in the Torah. So subhanAllah, it's a tafsir. We can go into tafsir a lot, but I'm trying to just kind of skim through it. It mentions also how they would brag at the Aus and the Khazraj. Remember, they would used to say, just you wait, there's a prophet that's coming. When he comes, we're going to follow him and destroy you all. Remember when he mentioned that? Surah Al-Baqarah also mentions that. وَكَانُوا مِن قَبْلُ يَسْتَفْتِحُونَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُم مَا عَرَفُوا كَفَرُوا بِهِ. They used to brag in front of the disbelievers, meaning the Aus and the Khazraj before they became Muslims. But when what they were waiting for came, they chose to disbelieve. And it also challenges the Jews as well. The Quran challenges them, and it says, if you truly claim to be upon the truth, and if you think that you guys are upon the guidance, and that these Muslims are upon misguidance, why don't you make dua against the group that is lying amongst the two of you? So you're saying you are the Jewish people, they are the Muslims. You are claiming that they are liars. Why don't you make a dua right now to your Creator to destroy the group that is lying? قل, as Allah says in the Quran, قل إن كانت لكم الدار الآخرة عند الله خالصة من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت. Why don't you wish death against the group that is lying amongst you? Why don't you do that? And so they refused, of course, to make dua because they know the truth. They see the truth and they chose to reject it. It also refutes their false allegations against Angel Jibreel and against Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam. They would accuse Angel Jibreel. There was an incident when they said, they had a conversation with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they said, we have an issue with Angel Jibreel, the one who's bringing you the revelation. Why? Because every time he comes down, when he used to come down to us, he would give us commandments that were too harsh towards us, involving bloodshed and violence and things like this. So this angel is an enemy to us. And so Allah said, in the Quran, قُلْ مَنْ كَانَ عَدُوًا لِجِبْرِيلٍ فَإِنَّهُ نَزَّلَهُ عَلَى قَلْبِكَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. And they also claim that Sulaiman alayhi salam, they would say, how come you guys are claiming he's a prophet when he is nothing but a magician? And so the Quran refutes them again, and it says, وَمَا كَفَرَ سُلَيْمَانَ وَلَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا. Right? And so on and on, it just continues on. It also refutes the arguments between the Jews and the Christians. There were several incidents where certain groups of the Jews would argue with certain groups of the Christians in front of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they would accuse each other to be upon misguidance. The Christians would tell the Jews that you are misguided. The Jews would tell the Christians you are misguided. And the Quran references this. وقالت اليهود ليست النصارى على شيء وقالت النصارى ليست اليهود على شيء وهم يتلون الكتاب. And the Quran admonishes them. It says you're both reciting the same book, or not the same book, different book, but they're coming from the same source. It's coming from Allah. The Torah comes from Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Prophet Musa told his people, follow Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Prophet Isa alayhi salam came to complete or to continue what Musa alayhi salam came from, and he was a believer of the Torah. So Allah is admonishing them, like, how come you are disagreeing with them and you are disagreeing with them? You guys should be the same, basically. And refutes their ignorance. Also, of the incidents, so we'll just skip over, of the incidents which is referenced in Surah Al-Baqarah, and that's what we're going to spend some more time on, is the incident which is referenced right at the beginning of the start of the second juz' of Surah Al-Baqarah. And that is a major incident that took place, and that is the changing of the Qiblah. You know the Qiblah, right? The Qiblah direction we pray towards. The original Qiblah, up till this point in the Seerah, had been towards Baytul Maqdis, Masjid Al-Aqsa. The Muslims used to pray towards Masjid Al-Aqsa. But we get narrations that explain to us, the background, how this came to be. We know that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to love the Kaaba very much. And even though Allah Azza wa Jalla had commanded him to pray towards Masjid Al-Aqsa, when he was in Mecca, he would always pray towards the Kaaba, such that he would see where is Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and he would put the Kaaba in the front. So he's praying towards Masjid Al-Aqsa, but he's also praying towards the Kaaba. And this is what is mentioned in Musnad Imam Ahmad, narrated by Ibn Abbas. كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يصلي بمكة نحو البيت المقدس والكعبة بين يديه. The Kaaba was in his Qibla. However, after the Hijrah, if we are, of course, to open the map, and we spoke about this before, Mecca is like at the bottom, Medina is up there, and then Masjid Al-Aqsa is up there. So now Prophet Muhammad can't do what he used to do in Mecca. He obviously he's a prophet, and he's not going to disobey the command of Allah just because of his own desire. Yes, he wants to face Mecca, but the command of Allah comes first. So now he has to face Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and put his back towards Mecca. And this was one thing that he, of course, he never complained, but he was hopeful. He hoped that perhaps Allah Azza wa Jal would change the Qibla. So that was one reason that really made him want to change the Qibla. But there was a matter that made it worse, and as we mentioned in the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, the arrogance of the Jews. The arrogance of the Jews. What does this have to do with anything? Because the Qibla of the Jews was also Masjid Al-Aqsa. And we get to see in early Medina, before this point, when Prophet Muhammad first arrived in Medina, he actually admired the Jews, because he saw them that, these are the followers of Musa alayhi salam. He expected them to be the first believers. Okay? And this is something that Quran admonishes as well. You're supposed to be the first believers. Don't be the first disbeliever. وَلَا تَكُونُوا أَوَّلَ كَافِرٍ بِهِ. Don't be the first group that disbelieves in the truth. And so he was actually hopeful towards them because, they already know what's a prophet. They already have a book. They already know everything. And they're expecting a prophet. So he was hopeful. So he would actually, in order to kind of gain the favor of the Jews, he would tell the Muslims, do whatever the Jews are doing. What they're however you see them praying, pray like them. Whatever they are wearing, wear like them. Whatever hairstyle they have the same hairstyle as them. But when they clearly started displaying signs of arrogance, and there were tensions that were growing, we get several authentic hadith where Prophet Muhammad switched completely 180 degrees, and he started telling them, the Muslims, Khaliful Yahud, go against whatever the Jews are doing. Whatever they do, don't do that. So we have, for example, a hadith, خالفوا اليهود فإنهم لا يصلون في نعالهم ولا خفافهم. The Jews, when they pray outside, they take their shoes off. So he's telling the Muslims, when you pray outside, pray with your shoes on. And this is the ruling to this day, by the way. If you go to like a park or somewhere and you want to pray, the sunnah is that you don't take your shoes off. You pray with your shoes on. Why? Because of this hadith. Because Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told the Muslims, the Jews take their shoes off, therefore don't take your shoes off. In another hadith he says, the Jews don't dye their hair. So dye your hair. So whatever he would see them doing, he would not want to do it like them. Now, of course, when it came to certain matters, yes, he had the right to say do and don't do. But obviously, in the matter of the Qiblah, this is not in the hands of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So he has no authority to tell the Muslims, don't pray in the same directions as the Jews. But now this just made him even more wanting to change the Qiblah because he doesn't want to follow the Jewish people. So he began making lots of earnest and sincere dua, so much so that he would raise his hands up to the sky. Like it's not just like a dua like this where he's looking down. He would actually look up to the sky and he would raise both of his hands up like this. Now this kind of dua, he would not do it very often. We only see, if we study the Seerah, this kind of dua, he did it in times of great and extreme desperation. Whenever he was really, really desperate and he felt like the situation was really serious. As we're going to see, in a couple more lectures, we can talk about the Battle of Badr. Right before the start of the Battle of Badr, Prophet Muhammad, he had his hands raised up like this. And he's literally making dua that, Ya Allah, if you don't grant us the victory, khalas, Islam is over. Nobody's going to worship you. And he was making sincere dua in this kind of manner. Now, nobody saw him making this kind of dua. Nobody saw him making this dua. So how do we know that he was raising his hands like this? Because Allah Azza wa Jal is the one who told us. And we get to know from the hadith in Al-Bukhari, Al-Bara, he narrates, لما قدم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم المدينة صلى نحو بيت المقدس 16 أو 17 شهرا. So Al-Bara is telling us when Prophet Muhammad arrived to Medina, he prayed towards Masjid Al-Aqsa for 16 or 17 months. So this is now where the verses are being revealed. 16 or 17 months after Hijrah. So most likely we are now sitting in Sha'ban, in Rajab or Sha'ban of the second year of the Hijrah. That's where this is all taking place. But he wished that he would be ordered to face the Kaaba. وكان يحب أن يوجه إلى الكعبة. فأنزل الله تعالى, Allah Azza wa Jal revealed the verse, قد نرى تقلب وجهك في السماء فلنولينك قبلة ترضاها فول وجهك شطر المسجد الحرام وحيث ما كنتم فولوا وجوهكم شطره. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, indeed, we see, Ya Rasulullah, we can see your face turning towards the sky. We can see you looking up to the sky. فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا. So we shall now turn you towards a qibla that shall make you happy. فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ. Now the command comes. Now turn your face towards Masjid Al-Haram. وَحَيْثُ مَا كُنْتُمْ. And all of them believers now, wherever you are, فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَهُ. So this is the verse where the commandment actually came down. And notice, by the way, the phrasing of this verse. It's so gentle. It's not like Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying, turn your face to Mecca now. Allah is saying, you know, I know that you want it, and I am giving it to you. You can now turn your face. So it's so gentle towards Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, this caused a lot of issues. It caused a lot of confusion when this happened, when the Qibla changed, both amongst the Muslims and the non-Muslims as well. Everybody was confused. What was this all about? Now, why was this confusing for the Muslims? It was confusing because for the most part, this was the first time that they were witnessing something called naskh. Naskh. Naskh in English, it means abrogation. What is abrogation? It means that Allah Azza wa Jal, at one point, He sent down a law, a rule. But then later, after some time, He sent another law that cancelled out that first law. So the original commandment was you have to face towards Masjid Al-Aqsa. But now, after a while, another commandment came, you have to face towards Mecca. So this was the first time that the Muslims were exposed to this kind of commandment. Now, in the speaking about naskh, this is a concept that we completely affirm as Muslims. It is found, as Muslims who are following the Sunnah, we affirm this concept completely. It is even explicitly mentioned in the Quran, ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسها نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها. Whatever verse we abrogate, ننسخ من آية أو ننسها, we bring a verse that is better than it, or a commandment that is more beneficial than the previous one, or something that is equal to it. And Allah also reveals another verse which gives us a little bit more explanation about the wisdom of what's the point of changing this qibla. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the same page, it's all in the first page of the second juz. وَمَا جَعَلْنَا الْقِبْلَةَ الَّتِي كُنْتَ عَلَيْهَا إِلَّا لِنَعْلَمَ مَنْ يَتَّبِعُ الرَّسُولَ ممن ينقلب على عقبيه. The only reason we changed the direction of the prayer that you were upon is so that we can distinguish the people. We can distinguish the good believers versus the doubtful believers. Who will listen and obey, and who will start asking questions. Who will say Sami'na wa ata'na and just follow because the Rasul told me to follow, and who will start having doubts about their religion. SubhanAllah. And this is, by the way, the essence of all the commandments that we find in the Quran, or just in our religion in general. The expectation for a believer, you follow the command, period. There is no room for questioning or asking, why should I or why should I not? You do the commandment, then you want to go and find out, you want to go research, see what the scholars say, what the Quran says, what the hadith say. You want to understand something, you can go ahead, but first make sure you're doing it. It's not that way. And unfortunately, nowadays, people have it flipped the other way around. And they say, I am not going to do it until I am convinced about it. You got that equation flipped. So you sometimes hear certain sisters who are not convinced that hijab is fard. And they will tell you, I won't do it until you prove it to me that it is fard. It's the other way around. You do it until you have some proof that it is not fard, which you will not be able to find because it is found in the Quran and in the Sunnah. And the same, by the way, it's not that I'm picking on the girls only. It's the same for any kind of command. A Muslim is someone who submits to the commands of Allah Azza wa Jal without questioning, without needing any kind of logical reasoning. If you can find logical reasoning or explanation, alhamdulillah. But even if you don't, and this is the point here, even if you don't, you still do it. And you're like, there's a wisdom that I don't know. And so we find it clearly mentioned here when it comes to the issue of changing the Qibla. We simply want to distinguish who are the true believers, who will follow our command versus مِمَّن يَنْقَلِبُ عَلَى عَقِبَيْهِ, versus those who will turn completely. So this was a test for the believers. Now, as for the Jewish people, it is narrated by Ibn Ishaq that after the Qibla changed, a group of Jews a group of Jewish leaders, they came to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they said, "Ya Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ما ولاك عن قبلتك التي كنت عليها وأنت تزعم أنك على ملة إبراهيم ودينه." What makes you now change the qibla that you were upon? How come now you're claiming that you are upon the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam when now you're here and you're changing things? ارجع إلى قبلتك التي كنت عليها نتبعك ونصدقك. If you go back to your old qibla, we shall believe in you and we shall listen to you. And so Allah responded, Allah Azza wa Jalla responded to them, and He informed Prophet Muhammad what to tell them. And Allah Azza wa Jalla says, سيقول السفهاء من الناس ما ولاهم عن قبلتهم التي كانوا عليها. The foolish amongst them shall question you, and they shall say, what caused them to turn away from the qibla that they were upon? قل, go ahead and tell them, لله المشرق والمغرب. To Allah belongs everything, the east and the west. يهدي من يشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. And Allah guides whomever He wants to the straight path. And so the Jews, they started arguing and saying, anyone who faces a qibla that is different from our qibla, Allah will not accept any of his deeds, and Allah shall not be pleased with him. And they said that it is only a person who has true faith and piety and iman is only the person who faces Baytul Maqdis, basically. And so once again, Allah responds and Allah reveals to them, ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب. True piety, true iman, is not by facing the east and the west. That's not the point here. He's telling the Jews, you guys are missing the point. ولكن البر, true piety, من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين. This is true piety, believing in Allah and the Day of Judgment, the angels, the books, the prophets, and having manners of believers. This is the essence of Iman. SubhanAllah, this is a theme that will reoccur in the Seerah a lot. And once again, as a reminder to us, the foundation of our deen comes in our Creator. You have to establish the Aqidah. It has to be there. La ilaha illallah has to be firm in the heart. It's not only the outside actions. And unfortunately, people, once again, when they go to teach their children, or when they come to teach a new convert, they do the wrong order of things. Like, yes, we understand there are certain commandments, there are obligations. Salah is fard, it's important, you have to teach them. You have to teach them what is Ramadan and fasting in Ramadan, that's fine. But this is not the foundation of a religion. In fact, if you analyze the verses of the Quran, over 90% of the Quran don't talk about salah. They don't talk about zakah. They don't talk about siyam. They tell you about believing in the Day of Judgment, believing in Allah, believing in the prophets, believing in the books. It's meant to establish your faith. Once the faith is established, you're not going to have any issues following any commandment, because that iman is firm in your heart. You already believe in Allah. You already firmly believe there's a Day of Judgment. So when you read that Allah tells you to pray, you're going to pray. When Allah tells you you got to fast, you will be fasting. When Allah tells you to put your hijab, you will put your hijab. When Allah tells you to cover certain things, you will cover certain things. Right? You won't complain. Why do I have to do this? Why can't I do this? You won't slack off. Khalas, because there's a foundation in there. And this is what Allah Azza wa Jalla is admonishing the Jewish people. And He's telling them, you guys misunderstood your religion. You guys took your book to only apply the physical laws, but you don't have iman. So also Allah Azza wa Jalla revealed in the Quran, in the same page, وَلَئِنْ أَتَيْتَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ بِكُلِّ آيَةٍ مَا تَبِعُوا قِبْلَتَكَ. If you were to bring the people of the book, namely the Jews, all evidences, بِكُلِّ آيَةٍ, every sign, مَا تَبِعُوا قِبْلَتَكَ, they will not follow your qibla. Arrogance. وَمَا أَنْتَ بِتَابِعٍ قِبْلَتَهُمْ, neither shall you follow their qibla. وَمَا بَعْضُهُمْ بِتَابِعٍ قِبْلَةَ بَعْضٍ, neither are they following the qibla of each other, meaning referring to the Jews and the Christians. They don't follow their qibla. These people don't follow this qibla. And this goes back to the point that we were mentioning earlier. They're bickering and arguing upon each other when both of them have completely missed the point. They've misunderstood their religion, and they think one is upon misguidance and the upon is upon guidance, right? So to the point where they don't even follow the qibla of one another. وَلَئِنِ اتَّبَعْتَ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَكَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِنَّكَ إِذًا لَمِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. And if you were to follow what they are wanting you to do, after all the knowledge and the evidences that we have brought to you, then you will become a zalim. Now, of course, this was to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is a prophet. And obviously, he will not fall into something, into this kind of sin. So, in fact, this ayah is reference towards us. This is talking to us. If you were to follow them, Ahlul Kitab, the Jews and the Christians and the other groups out there, after all of these signs that have been revealed to you, then you are a zalim. You have truly oppressed yourself. You've truly lost your way if you have done this. When the Qibla changed, also it is narrated in the Tirmidhi, the Muslims asked, يا رسول الله كيف بإخواننا الذين ماتوا وهم يصلون إلى بيت المقدس. يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, what will happen to our brothers who passed away before this commandment came? Like they prayed all of their prayers to Bayt al-Maqdis and they didn't pray a single prayer to Masjid Al-Aqsa. What's going to happen to them? Or any of their prayers accepted? To Allah, to this Allah Azza wa Jal reveals again in the same verse, وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُضِيعَ إِيمَانَكُمْ. Allah Azza wa Jal shall not waste, shall not go let their deeds go to waste, meaning their prayers shall be accepted. But interesting wording here as well. وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُضِيعَ إِيمَانَكُمْ. Even though they're asking about salah. Salah, they asked about salah, Allah responds with iman. No iman can exist without salah. Salah is the backbone of your Islam. Think of a body. What's going to happen to a body without a backbone? There is no body. There is no functioning. Good luck living. You need the backbone. So iman, the container of iman cannot exist if salah is not established. Now, how did the actual change of the Qibla take place? What was the actual incident that took place? Now, this incident, it is mentioned by many of the scholars of tafsir. So people like Ibn Kathir and like Ibn Sa'd in his book of Al-Tabaqat and other mufassirun as well. So Ibn Kathir, he mentions in his tafsir أن تحويل القبلة نزل على رسول الله وقد صلى ركعتين من الظهر وذلك في مسجد بني سلمة. So that he mentions that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, at that time, it was around Dhuhr time. And he was not actually in Masjid al-Nabawi. He was in a masjid called the Masjid of Banu Salama, in the area of the tribe of Banu Salama. And he prayed, he was in the middle of prayer. And he prayed 2 rak'ahs of Dhuhr prayer. And that was when the commandment came and he changed the Qibla in the middle of the Salah. So he prayed 2 rak'ahs in one direction, and then in the middle of the Salah, the commandment came, and he prayed the other 2 rak'ahs in a different direction. And this is why the Masjid of Banu Salama was renamed to Masjid Al-Qiblatayn. So if you guys ever go to Medina and you stop by Masjid Al-Qiblatayn, you are now standing in the masjid where Prophet Muhammad ﷺ prayed 2 rak'ahs in one direction and then prayed 2 rak'ahs in the other direction in the same salah. Now, other narrations, they mention slightly different things, slightly different stories, and perhaps they don't go against each other. Perhaps they're also happening, in another narration, it mentions that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ visited the mother of a Sahabi by the name of Al-Bara ibn Azib. And she prepared some food for Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and this was around Dhuhr time. And so when it was Dhuhr time, he went to pray Dhuhr at Banu Salama, because she lived in Banu Salama. And then in the middle of the prayer, the Qibla changed. So once again, we don't see any contradictions, but perhaps, these narrations, they complete each other. But Allahu Alam, Allah knows if this is actually the truth of the story. This is what the Mufassirun say, but in fact, they don't bring any hadith or any isnad about this. However, we do have some authentic narrations that we find in Sahih al-Bukhari. What we know for sure, Al-Bara ibn Azib, the same person that we just talked about, not his mother, himself, he says, النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان أول ما قدم المدينة. So, it's a long hadith, I'm just going to skip. وأنه صلى أول صلاة صلاها صلاة العصر وصلى معه قوم So now he's saying he prayed Asr prayer in the direction of Mecca. So his first full prayer prayed towards Mecca was was this Asr prayer. So he doesn't mention that Dhuhr prayer and in the middle he switched that. So Allahu Alam. وصلى معه قوم, and there was a group of people that prayed with him. فخرج رجل ممن صلى معه فبر على أهل مسجد وهم راكعون. So after this person prayed Asr with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he then left, to go back home or something. He passed by a different masjid. They had not received the news that they prayed, that the Qibla was now changed. And they were in the middle of the ruku'. So he went to them in the middle of the prayer and he says, أشهد بالله لقد صليت مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قبل مكة فداروا كما هم قبل البيت. That he told them, like he literally came from the back of the masjid and he says, I swear to you, I was just with Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم and we just prayed towards Mecca. And then he says, all of them on the spot, they changed their Qibla and they prayed towards Mecca. So, the misconception here is that only Masjid Al-Qiblatain changed the Qibla in the same Salah. It was called, according to most scholars of Tafsir, as a Masjid Al-Qiblatain is because Prophet Muhammad ﷺ prayed in it and he changed the Qibla in the middle of the Salah. But many other masajid were also doing the same thing, because as you can imagine, like the news started with Masjid Al-Qiblatain, and then it spread and spread and spread, and the farther you spread, the more people get the news, and they would turn. And in fact, we get to learn from another authentic hadith that the Masjid in Quba, they prayed towards Mecca in the Fajr of the next morning. So it took them that long for the news to reach them. Like imagine, Prophet Muhammad prayed potentially Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha and Fajr towards Mecca. The people in Masjid Al-Qiblatain, Masjid Quba, they prayed Asr, Maghrib, Isha towards Bayt al-Maqdis because they didn't know that the Qibla changed. And it was only towards Fajr time that they knew and they switched towards the Kaaba. Now, how did the switching actually take place? Some scholars, they explain it. Of course, we don't actually know how it happened, but some scholars, they explain it and they say that literally all the rows rotated 180 degrees in the middle of Salah. Like, can you imagine? Like, if we're here going to pray Isha prayer in like 10 more minutes, we're all praying, and then the commandment comes to change the Qibla, and then all of us, as we were standing, we just kind of split to the, just turn to the other direction, and literally the Imam switches around and he moves between all the rows so he was at the very front, now he's at the very back. So he rotates and he moves between all the rows to the front of the masjid. So, Allahu Alam, this is how some of the scholars they explained it. Now, after the Qibla got changed, so this is now like what we know about the incident. After the Qibla got changed, remember when we mentioned first the structure of the masjid, right? We mentioned that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he had a partial roof at the front, right? So he did not have a full roof. So the point of the roof was to give shade for the people who are praying, right? But now the back is front and front is back. So now that shade that they put is no longer shading them. So now they put another portion of the roof to block the front. So now there was something blocking the back, covering the back, and something covering the front, and there was, you can say, an opening in the middle. Allahu Alam. And so the front, of course, was for the people, for the Musallin. The back of the masjid was made as a shelter for a certain group of people referred to as Ahlul Suffah, the people of As-Suffah. Who are the people of As-Suffah and why do they have a special status? Ahlul Suffah were very knowledgeable people. Like, of course, all of the Sahaba are knowledgeable, but if you want to know the most knowledgeable out of the Sahaba, they are Ahlul Suffah. They were people who were famous for their Quran, for their piety, for their knowledge, for even in the battles, and they were considered to be like the elite amongst the Sahaba. Why? There was a trade-off. Because they literally gave everything for the sake of Islam. And they were so poor that they did not even have a house. The brotherhood, the mu'akhad that happened, some of them did not get a paying. and some of them were in the masjid. And they literally had nothing. Some of them literally the only thing they owned was the cloth on their bodies. And even then, sometimes that was not even enough. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ sometimes had to do special rulings for them just because it was causing some issues. You know, back in the day, there was no barrier between the women's side and the men's side. The men would pray in the front, and the women would pray in the back. So the women in the front row, in front of them was the last row of the men. And it was sometimes problematic because some of the Ahlul Sufa were so, lightly dressed, or they didn't have enough to completely cover up, to the point where Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would tell the women that, "O women, don't raise your heads from sajda with us. Like, wait for some time, then raise your head, because you don't want to see things that you don't want to see." Because they were basically that poor, they did not have enough to cover them, and sometimes their own auras would literally be exposed during their sujood. And there are many, many hadith about taking care of the people of As-Suffa and the charity that was given to them. He would tell his daughter Fatima when she gave birth to Al-Hasan, that that go give charity, go give sadaqah to the Ahlul Suffa, to the people of As-Suffa. And some of the Ansar and some of the people of Medina, they willingly joined in and moved in with Ahlul Suffa because they wanted their knowledge. So subhanAllah, can you imagine? So it wasn't, so you don't think of Ahlul Suffa as just a shelter. The more appropriate terminology to put to Ahlul Suffa is a university. It's a place of knowledge. It's like a school. And some of them literally would go to their homes and they would spend their whole day with Ahlul Suffa so they can learn from them. So for example, we know Hanzala, the famous Hanzala. He had a house. He's amongst the Ansar, and he had a house, yet he was living with Ahlul Suffa. Ka'b ibn Malik, the famous Ka'b ibn Malik. He had a house, yet he was living with Ahlul Suffa. So it's not just a freeloading shelter. It's not like a homeless shelter. It was a place of learning and education. And many, many famous Sahabi, big names, like you have, for example, Abu Dharr, Bilal ibn Rabah, Suhayb al-Rumi, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. They all had places to stay, yet they willingly moved with Ahlul Suffa. And subhanAllah, this and many of them became memorizers of the Quran as well. And this is why, as battles were taking place later beyond the Seerah, when there were many battles taking place, a lot of Ahlul Suffa were being killed, were dying in the battle. And this is where, Umar ibn Khattab, he went and he expressed his concern to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and he says that, Abu Bakr, we're losing a lot of Ahlul Suffa. We're losing a lot of the memorizers of the Quran. And this was what inspired for the first time ever the idea of collecting the Quran into an actual book, because the Quran was not written in a book. It was just memorized in the heads of people, subhanAllah. And so these were Ahlul Suffa. Of the most famous of Ahlul Suffa is Abu Hurairah. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he was amongst Ahlul Suffa, even though he was not of the early Medina. He came actually after the Battle of Khaybar. He migrated from Yemen and he accepted Islam. He was from the tribe of Daws. His name is Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr ad-Dawsi, from the tribe of Daws in Yemen. So he was not Meccan or from Medina. He migrated to Medina, and he was of the poor people who used to live in Ahlul Suffa. And subhanAllah, look where he was and look at what he became. There isn't a single Muslim today, no matter how knowledgeable or they are, everybody has heard of the name Abu Hurairah. And everybody links Abu Hurairah with hadith. They know. Whenever we're talking about hadith, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه, they know that he is the authority when it comes to narrating a hadith. But just to give you a glimpse of how poor they were, Abu Hurairah, he himself narrates some stories that sometimes he would say, I would go to a Sahabi and I would ask him certain questions as he was walking out of the masjid. And I would, like, basically, the Sahabi is done with the masjid, he's going back home. I would be walking with him, asking him questions, and he would say, Wallahi, I knew the answers to the questions before I asking him. The only reason I'm asking him is just hoping that by the time this man reaches his house, he'll invite me inside for some food, because I have nothing to eat. And it is mentioned that one time Prophet Muhammad SAW, he saw him very, very hungry, and he saw him very exhausted. So he went to his house and he told Aisha radiallahu anha that, is there anything that we can give him to eat or drink? And so she says, yes, there is a glass of milk that you can perhaps give. So Abu Huraira, he became so happy. He saw this glass of milk and he thought he was going to drink it. But Prophet Muhammad SAW told him, Abu Huraira, go round up all of Ahlul Suffah. And so over there, I was like, what is this? You know, like I thought I was gonna get this glass of milk. So he goes and he rounds up like 30 or 40 people. I gathered all of them. And so Prophet Muhammad SAW, he handed me the cup of milk and he's like, go hand the cup to every one of them and make sure they all drink from this cup. And so he's like, you know, it's the Prophet ﷺ ordering me. I can't do anything about it. So he's like, you know, so he goes and he hands the cup to every one of them. And he's thinking to himself, like, like, what's going to be left for me? Like 40 people, and imagine this cup, you know, it's half filled right now, and everybody here in the room drinks. What is it going to be left for me at the end? And when every single one of them finished, um, it was only him and Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that had not drank from the milk. So he told him, sit down, and he told me, drink. And so he says, I looked at the cup and it was full as if nobody had drank from the cup. And so he says, drink, and I drank. And then he tells me, drink again, and I continued drinking, and I continued drinking and drinking until I could not drink a single drop anymore. And then when I finished drinking, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ started drinking. And subhanAllah, so this is one of the many miracles that we'll see across the seerah where Allah Azza wa Jalla puts barakah in something, even though it's something small. When the barakah of Allah Azza wa Jalla comes into it, it becomes enough. It almost increases in size, and it becomes enough to for many to go ahead out there and to enjoy it. And of the things that the Sahaba did for Ahlul Suffah is they basically hung a string or like a rope between the pillars of the masjid, such that anyone who wanted to donate any kind of food or dates or something, they would feel free to just walk into the masjid. They would hang the food, like you can think like they would hang the food on this string, and anybody who is in need would go there, kind of just like this food bank that we have upstairs, right? Like anybody can just go there and just take it and use it. And this custom actually lasted for quite a long time. So I think this is a good place for us to stop. I don't want to move on to the next topic, inshallah, because inshallah next week we're going to start talking about the commandment of jihad coming down, and the Muslims starting their offensive against the Quraysh and the people who wronged them in the first place. So, and of course, it is every time anything associated with jihad is considered to be usually a sensitive topic, because oh, jihad, and BBC News and CNN, and I'm talking about. So we'll talk about that in more detail, inshallah, next week. We only have 3 more minutes left till Iqamah. But is there anybody who has a quick question or so before we go upstairs? Masjid what? Masjid Jum'ah. You mean the masjid where they prayed their first Jum'ah? It's very possible, yes. We don't know for sure, but it's very possible, because they didn't have many masajid back in the day, and we know he prayed his first khutbah in the Masjid of Banu Salama, and we're told here that Masjid Banu Salama became known as Masjid Al-Qiblatayn. So yes, it is very possible that this is the same masjid. Any other questions? Okay, inshallah, I'll come back downstairs again after the salah in case anyone has any questions. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.